All right, we're live. I'm Harry Powell for Severe MMA, and I am joined by one more time, joined by the man himself, IMMAF world champion, Fergus Jenkins. Fergus, how's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely, an absolute pleasure. So I think if we jump right into sort of where we are and where we left off. I can't remember exactly how long ago it was since we had our last conversation, but it was a number of months ago. If we just straight out of the bill have a quick discussion about what's been going on in life since that last interview. Obviously, you just come home from the IMMAFs and you were in quarantine at the time. Now we're in no quarantine. You're in a little bit of nicer surroundings in a hotel room, getting bothered by people for lunch. So what's been happening in the last few months?
Well, obviously, when I got back, I got a bit of time to rest and recover, which was really much needed because I was coming straight off the IMMAF and I had a couple of other fights before then, so it was all back to back to back. So I got some much needed recovery time. But since then, it's just been back into training, just back to the next thing. I guess like the grind never stops. You can't rest on your laurels. You just got to keep just working even harder, if anything, training harder to make sure I can live up to expectations.
And that last sentence is, I think, the thing that sort of a point that I wanted to look at. Obviously, you came into the IMMAFs without a huge name, right? I don't mean that disrespectfully, but I think that not many people knew who you were and about you as a fighter. But obviously, going in and having the performance that you had at the IMMAFs will have changed that dramatically. How have you noticed changes in your life since then?
There's definitely been changes. Obviously, like in terms of like actually doing interviews and media and stuff like that was something I never did before. Whereas that's starting to become more of a frequent thing. And then just like random occurrences, like every now and again, occasionally people will recognize me, just random people, and it's like, what? It's just so weird. Obviously, I'm not like a household name or anything, but yeah, been in the media a bit, so every now and again people recognize me. And then just like some people that sort of knew that I did MMA but didn't really know how serious it was, and then to all of a sudden see my name in the headlines and everything, I think that just showed them, like, I guess, what level I was at, and it might have surprised some people. But yeah, it's just interesting seeing different people's reactions around me that might not have known exactly how seriously I take it, or yeah.
And for you personally, do you feel like you've had a significant change in yourself after getting that notoriety? I mean, you're a young man, and we're not talking Conor McGregor levels of notoriety here, but to be asked to do media, to be asked to be in this interview and that interview, to see your name in this headline, to get recognized on the street, like, what does that do for you specifically as a person?
I guess it can be hard to tell when you're seeing it from your own perspective. Like I wouldn't think much. I feel like the same person as I was beforehand, but I guess everyone's going to say that. But I mean, I'm sure on some level it would have changed something. Maybe yeah, I guess like in my MMA game and then just life in general, I guess I just want to use it to give myself more confidence and just like build off it and use that as something to take me even further. So I suppose I just want to use it as sort of a platform to go even higher.
Right, because I mean, in the last interview, we talked about when you were a child, confidence wasn't at an all-time high, but through the vehicle of martial arts, you've been able to find some of that confidence and bring about yourself. I guess a new aura of confidence, a new understanding for what that word means, and I think that's kind of what I saw from it, or what I would take from it, from going from flying out and having these expectations of yourself to coming back with a gold medal wrapped around your waist or wrapped around your neck, and all of this newfound notoriety. It's cool that you've taken it as fuel rather than allowed it to sort of seep into natural life and expect these things to come, right?
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing, eh? Like it's about, even I've been reading a book by GSP, his biography, and he talks about how.
It's a fantastic book.
Have you read that one? Yeah, it's really
Of
good.
course, man. It's GSP, of course.
Yeah. And I guess his whole thing is staying grounded and realizing he's no different to anyone else. Like the reason he's got to where he's at is because of discipline and routine and his work ethic. So I guess you got to realize just like you're the same person the day before you win the world championship as the day after. Like nothing really changes. Nothing intrinsic about you as a person has changed. You just got this flashy title. It's the hard work and the routine that got you there, and that's what's either going to keep you on the path or take you off it, depending on whether you follow that.
I mean, I think I have 2 points on that. The first one is, have you heard Chris Weidman talk about after he won the title? Have you heard him talk about this?
Nah.
So when Chris Weidman won the title, he went back into the changing room with the title wrapped around his waist, and he looked in the mirror, and he had this vast realization of, this is not what I expected it to be. I expected everything to change. I've worked all of my life throughout his wrestling career, his high school career, his MMA career to reach this pinnacle, to have this moment. And then he gets the moment and he's like, I'm in the same set of changing rooms. I'm going to have the same shower. I'm going to go home to the same family. Like nothing has changed. And I wanted to ask, and I'll lead this on to my next question, but I wanted to ask about how did the win in the IMMAF, did that cause any depression is a very strong word, but did you feel any negative emotions coming back from that? Like almost like a come down from the high that was the IMMAFs?
Yeah, maybe to some extent. I mean, I was aware that like a lot of people, like, I mean, Tyson Fury is a prime example. Like, it's quite a common experience, when you work so hard towards one goal. But I suppose for me, it's about enjoying the whole process. Like, I knew that in the training camp, in the build up, I was like, I've got to enjoy the whole process of it because just the goal itself isn't going to be worth it if you don't enjoy the road to get there. Because that's a temporary thing, a momentary glory, and then you realize, it's not necessarily all it's hyped up to be. So you've got to enjoy the training, enjoy the lifestyle, and that's the main thing I like about it. And then all the titles and whatever, like winning on the night and competing, that's just a cherry on top for me. So I'd say it probably didn't help coming back into quarantine, where it was sort of 2 weeks in isolation. Like that wasn't, amazing, but I definitely didn't experience anything near the extent of like Tyson Fury or even Chris Weidman in that case. I think I was aware of what it was going to feel like, and that helped me preempt that.
And I'm going to lead that into my second question. You mentioned in GSP's book, what you took from it is he's saying, "Oh, I'm just the same as everyone else," but that's not quite true, though, is it? Like the discipline and the skill acquisition and the grind and the dedication to the grind and the ability to just continue on, the commitment to this entire process. That's something that specifically in an athletic endeavor and an athletic endeavor as difficult as MMA is, that's quite a rare trait, right? Do you recognize that what you're doing, that whilst maybe the fiber makeup, the DNA makeup of your body is the same as everyone else, the endeavor that you've chosen is a more difficult one than other endeavors?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose on that point, what I would argue what GSP is saying is that in terms of we're all the same in terms of the physical attributes, more or less. Obviously some people are more athletic than others, but it's about the work you put in. So yeah, what makes him different is his drive, and I mean champions in general is the drive and the diligence and the routine. But you can't think that, oh, I'm a champion, I don't need to do these things, because that is what makes you different. So it's the hard work, it's what you put in that makes you different. I think that's the point he's trying to get across. And so yeah, and I do recognize like MMA is real hard. Like it's and there's no point where you can the hardest part, yeah, there's no point where you can rest and just chill, because the greatest champions in the world still have to keep that same routine and work like they just started, even though they've got all the money and the glory and whatever. That if you want to keep that, it's just about keeping that same level of dedication throughout.
I think I agree. I do think I agree. I mean, I would definitely argue that physical attributes are a huge advantage in MMA. Specifically, if you look at somebody like GSP, who's an incredible athlete, or you look at somebody like, I don't know, Curtis Blades is fighting this weekend, right? Like Curtis Blades is a fantastic athlete, but you can't have the perfect athletics if you don't add. Sorry, you can't have the results just by having perfect athletics, right? You have to add something to it. And I think, to your point about champions, I mean, almost all of the champions right now in the UFC are fantastic athletes that have added that bit, right? If we talk about GSP, we talk about Demetrius Johnson, we talk about John Jones, right? The real AAA star athletes, the real AAA star fighters are somebody that have supreme athletics along with the things that you've just discussed, right? They have the brilliant drive, they have the motivation, they have the commitment, they have everything along with this incredible meat vehicle that they can use to be primed to be fantastic in whatever sport they choose, right? Do you take something from that? I mean, obviously you're not a bad athlete yourself, right?
Yeah.
How do you spend time thinking about your physical athletic ability over the skill acquisition and the cerebral nature that you approach fighting with?
Well, I think that there's obviously something to athleticism. I mean, it's an athletic endeavor, so your natural athletic ability is going to influence your potential, definitely to some extent. But I think, yeah, like the more, like when I first started and I always hear athletes talk about it's 90% mental, I'd be like, oh, bullshit. Like, there's no way. It must be like 80% physical at least. But the more I've gotten into it myself, the more I can resonate with that. Like, that seems like I'm getting closer to that figure. I'm maybe working my way up towards 90%. Maybe not quite there yet. But I think a lot of these, obviously John Jones, GSP, Demetrius Johnson, those guys you listed, they are great athletes, but I think there's a lot of people more athletic than them that wouldn't have made it anywhere near as far. And it's all those mental attributes that I think count for a lot more. And a lot of those athletic attributes, some of them they're born with them, but a lot of them, they're made in the gym through the hard work, through the strength and conditioning, whatever it is, and the discipline and the diet. That all breeds some athleticism to some extent as well. Yeah.
So I'm going to take a slight pivot if I can. In the last conversation we had, we talked about you going from back to back to back to back to back camps, where you were focusing on getting ready for fights and all of those things. And in that conversation, we talked about leaning things towards skill acquisition over necessarily getting ready for camps, at least in amateur. How have you changed your training at all since you come back from the IMMAFs and gotten back into training? If so, what are those changes that you've made?
I have thought about that point a fair bit, actually. I actually had another thought with regards to that. So one thing that I think that the training camp could be good for is it gives you specific time to prepare. Like, for example, my next fight is against a longer, lankier opponent. So going into something like that, even if you spend the 6 weeks preparing for that specific person, in some ways that's good opportunity to acquire the skills that are going to prepare you for that body type as you go into the professional ranks. So I wonder, there's definitely something to not overemphasizing a specific opponent and a specific fight camp. But at the same time, if you're preparing for a specific opponent, you can put a lot of those skills into the bank that you learned over that training camp and take that out at a later date when you're fighting a person with similar attributes. So I was thinking about that as well, like this opportunity that I've got for the training camp, I can build up these skills that I can then take out in the future if I fight someone again with similar attributes to my upcoming opponent.
Okay, well, first of all, before we unpack that, because if we unpack that, if you're happy to talk about that a little bit more, that'll probably be a little bit of a long conversation. Do you want to first talk about your upcoming fight? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's been in the pipeline a bit, but I'm up against this guy. His name's Jonas Grace. So he was
I'm
competing
aware
over
of Jonas
for a
Grace.
while. He's from New Zealand originally, and yeah, he did quite well over in England. Captured a few amateur titles, and yeah, so we're scheduled to fight on a regional show, just a couple of hours drive away from my hometown, which is handy. And yeah, so that will be somewhere around like April 30th to mid-May, sort of thing. So a good 5 to 7 weeks or something. Hopefully you get that ironed out, the exact date. But yeah, that's a really exciting one.
That's a great fight. That is going to be the battle of front headlock for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be weird fighting someone taller than myself. I think he's
Sure.
6'5".
Yeah, he's a big boy. He's a big fella.
Yeah. And I think he competed at welterweight in the UK.
Yeah.
Crazy to me at that height. So that's exciting for me, going up against someone with that sort of frame.
Okay, so we'll push that fight to the side for now, and I want to open up the conversation that we just parked. So I think my thought, and bearing in mind I'm not a fucking fighter, right? So I think this is really why I asked you this question, because you have the experience that I don't have. But to me, my example is going to be Tom Aspinall, right? So Tom Aspinall. Did you watch the UFC London card, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you know the result, you know how the fight went. That's fine. That's fine. So Tom Aspinall went in and gave one of the most confident performances I've seen in a long time, specifically under that sort of context, right? First main event in his home country. All of the fighters that had gone before had essentially won, other than Corey McKenna and Jai Herbert. And he went out and he still managed to put on that confidence, right? And I haven't spoken to Tom. I'd love to, and maybe that's something that can happen in the future. But to me, it felt as though that confidence comes from two things. One, being overall confident in your own abilities, regardless of the person in front of you. And secondly, obviously, game planning for Volkov. There was some tape released, and he had some 6'9" Dutch kickboxer in there, and he was doing rounds with him, and obviously he's getting body types and whatever. But my question, specifically as an amateur fighter, is whether it's more important early on to focus a significant amount of time on building skills for a specific body type, specifically a specific body type that's quite rare at your weight class, right? Somebody, one, taller than you, two, rangier than you, over taking the time to focus on yourself, right, as your own fighter. Because you're, as we've already known from the previous interview and things you've said in this one, and equally the way that you fight, you're a very cerebral fighter. You don't take unnecessary risks. You look for the correct decisions. Your fight IQ is quite high. So from those things, and you've also got a fucking economics qualification. So we're not dealing with a, what have we got? Are we going to see it? Come on, let's see.
Mate. Here we go.
There, everyone, a round of applause. A round of applause for Mr. Jenkins. A round of applause. Fantastic. Well done, sir.
Real world title.
Well done. Yeah, exactly. A fucking real world title, tangible one. Yeah, like I wonder, what's your thought on that? Do you find that in the camp you could get really digged into the weeds, or do you find that maybe focusing on yourself just for your own self would be more beneficial?
Try not to dig into the weed when I'm in camp, but
respect.
Yeah, got to be disciplined. So yeah, and like you really convinced me in our last conversation about the value of that. But then I've also been thinking, as part of working on yourself, that is in essence a big part of that is working on how your skills can be applied to people of different body types and styles. So I suppose, I feel like by working on an approach to fight someone taller than myself and longer and lankier, I'm building my own skills and my own internal abilities as well by doing that. But then, yeah, you definitely don't want to get too carried away to where you're you're over preparing for one style and you're neglecting all these other aspects of your game. So when you go pro and inevitably the opponent isn't going to exactly match who you face as an amateur, you won't be prepared for a range of skill sets, but rather just a specific few that you've prepared really hard for. So I think there's something to having a, because it's quite good having a face and a name to who I'm fighting. You know, that's motivating to build those skills, and that gives me the motivation I need to go out there and seek knowledge on how to beat that style, how to beat that person. But you don't want to go too far to where you're not getting the wide range of skills to where you're prepared for anyone. So I think it just comes down to a balance. As an amateur, you're going to go further towards the generalized skill set that you're sort of proposing, less specific towards the opponent. And yeah, as you go professional, that will switch more, I suppose, towards specifically preparing for someone. You know, you're getting paid for it. You're getting money, and there's a lot on the line. So you want to make sure you're fully prepared for whoever's next. But yeah, obviously amateur, the stakes aren't as high. So just build that skill set.
For sure. And I think that's a very intelligent way to look at it, to be honest. I think balance is absolutely the right way to look at it. I mean, if you have a face and a name and you have an understanding of a style, why not, you know, getting used to executing a game plan dependent on a shape, a frame, a style, is obviously going to lend well when you turn over to the professional ranks. But obviously, as you've just touched on, at amateur, in comparison to your professional record, nobody really cares if you win or lose. Like, going out and winning a tournament like the IMMAFs is an absolutely huge deal. But if you'd gone out and lost the final and turned over pro and had a 10-0 record, nobody's going to be like, oh, but he lost the final in the IMMAF, so he's obviously shit. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not a thing. And the way that I sort of relate that to other people who aren't necessarily looking at the MMA game the way that you or I are is, if you go to a local jiu-jitsu tournament and there's a blue belt competing on a mat and a black belt competing on a mat, who are you watching? Because it's not the blue belt, you know? The likelihood is people are going to watch the black belts. So that amateur career, your amateur MMA career, is essentially white to brown, right? White to brown belt. And then when you get to, you turn over professional, that's when those results really matter. As you say, you're getting paid, right? That professional record is on the line. It's your livelihood at the end of the day. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that a balance is the key. And I mean, you know, I think a balance is the key to most things in life, right?
Yeah, and that's the hard thing, is finding, you know, the Goldilocks point where you're at the right balance and you're not overemphasizing one or the other, and that's just trial and error, I suppose.
So I'm going to switch over to a conversation that we've been having sort of internally in Severe MMA. We run this, we run a podcast called The Speaker's Corner, which essentially is a conversation about topics conducive to MMA, but not things inside the actual fighting part, right? Like topics outside of MMA. And one of the things we've been talking about is the amateur rule set, right? And is it structured well for setting up fighters to turn over to the professional ranks? And the main sort of talking point that we've been having is about 3-minute rounds over 5-minute rounds, right? So I'll lay out the argument, and then if you don't mind giving me your thoughts.
Yep, definitely.
All right. So currently in the MMA rule set, damage or effective grappling, i.e. submission attempts or weakening somebody based on submission attempts, is the primary scoring criteria. It feels as though a 3-minute round is difficult when it comes to the grappling perspective, either to complete the takedown that you're looking for, unless it's a well-timed double leg or whatever. If there's cage wrestling happening and the other person is defensively sound, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to chain your takedowns to get them down. That consumes time, right? The second thing is when you hit the mat, looking to move towards submissions, looking to threaten submissions, is going to be difficult if you're fighting a game opponent, right? So, do you think that those 3 minutes are helpful, and do you think that they are conducive to setting you up to a good professional career, knowing that when you turn over pro, you're going to have two extra minutes in comparison to when you were fighting amateur?
Good question. Yeah, I wonder what the history is behind the 3-minute rounds. Like when that was decided that was the way to go for an amateur fight compared to the professional ranks. Yeah, it does seem like a strange distinction to make. You know, if you're trying to prepare someone as best you can for a professional rule set, why would you change it so drastically to where it's almost half as or 40% less time in each round? Obviously, there's still a huge amount of crossover going for an amateur fight to a professional. Like you're still learning a lot, but I would say that I agree that that 3-minute round it's not gonna prepare you as well as if amateurs were 5-minute rounds, just like professionals. And I don't see it as necessarily more dangerous or more risky having 5-minute rounds for amateurs. But it's not something I've ever thought about. So, yeah.
Because, like, if we unpack that just slightly a little bit more, specifically to somebody of your style, now obviously you're looking to be a well-rounded MMA fighter and just as good on the feet as you are grappling. But in the IMMAFs, what was so impressive is your ability to implement your grappling game on other good grapplers, right? But predominantly in most of those fights, it was basically whoever got the takedown won the round, right? Now,
Yep.
in professional MMA, you see a lot of guys get taken down, they get back up. They get taken down again, maybe, they get back up. They might get taken down again. And, you may see a rinse and repeat of mat returns, unless you're somebody like Khabib, who obviously, if he grounds you, or Islam Makhachev, it's going to be very, very difficult to get up.
Yeah.
Right? Just ultra dominant when it hits the ground, right? But I think, to your point just now, those 3 minutes, they kind of, in my opinion, they potentially offer almost like a false sense of security, right? There's a bit of a feeling out process in the round. Maybe you spend 30 seconds, 45 seconds getting into it on the feet, making your reads again and seeing the adjustments that have been made pre-round. You hit your takedown, you got 30 seconds to work. You have 45 seconds to work, And if you're the guy on bottom, I've only got 45 seconds to survive here. All I need to do is not take much damage. And then the scoring is pretty much dependent on what happened in the feet and the feeling out process. If you're the grappler, you're like, I need to land big damage here, or I need to land some submissions, and I've only got 30 seconds. And that's not necessarily conducive to forcing the controlled approach on the ground that you would expect of, let's say, an Islam Makhachev or a Khabib or whatever it is, right? So it just seems like that 3-minute round isn't a great parallel. And I also think if you're an amateur fighter that's just looking to win fights rather than gain experience to take into your professional ranks, the same rule applies. All I need is a takedown, right? All I need is a takedown. Whereas for you want to be able to experiment on the feet, right? Chuck a few hands. Let's see what happens. I've always got that grappling in my back pocket if I need it. If it gets a bit hairy and it gets a bit scary on the feet, I can always push the guy to a fence or shoot a nice double or whatever it is, right? Because, what do you think about that before I carry on my rant?
I think you've convinced me again. You've done it again, man. Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's nothing I don't agree about that. I mean, yeah, a 3-minute round is never going to simulate the same strategy as a 5-minute round will. There's obviously going to be differences, and if amateur MMA had 5-minute rounds, it would obviously, I think, prepare you a lot better for that as you turn professional.
All right. So what I'm hearing is, if you decide to compete again at the IMMAFs as world champion, you're going to be like, look, lads, we need 5 minutes. That's what we need.
I'm not coming back. The gold uniform is not enough to entice me back. I need 5-minute rounds.
The gold uniform is nice, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's definitely a cherry on top.
Yeah. What do you think about going back to the IMMAFs? Are you interested?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think. I mean, that's why I'm staying amateur. That's the main reason. Just because that convinced me that that amount of experience in such a short period of time, it's hard to get that anywhere else. So I may as well take advantage of that as much as I can.
So we're saying 2022 world champ, double champ.
2 times. Yeah, man.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I want to pivot again, if that's possible. I noticed on your Instagram that you have, I don't know whether you personally, but somebody has collaborated with you to make a song, a UK rapper. Okay, first of all, talk me through that. How did that come about?
So that's I met this guy. He was with a couple of the other boys from up in Auckland. They train around there, and they were competing Ollie and Rory. And their mate Tom came along, and he was doing like sort of media, just taking photos and filming and stuff. And I ended up sharing the room with him for the whole tournament. So I got to know him real well, and he was just filming and taking photos for everyone. And he's real generous, putting together videos for me and doing all the filming, which was real helpful because that was something I wanted to do, but I didn't necessarily have the initiative to go out there and get the equipment and organize it all myself. So I was just fortunate to stumble across him, and he's real passionate about that stuff, which is cool to see for such a young guy. And yeah, so he organized that whole collab or whatever situation that was, and that was an awesome video. I thought a real good edit.
So is the song specifically written for your performance at the IMMAFs? Because I listened to it and it sort of could have been, right?
I think that's just coincidence.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was just I'd never heard of the guy before, but Tom managed to link it up, and he got that going.
So have you spoken to the rapper? Have you had any communication with him?
Nah, I haven't actually personally, just them two.
Right, I understand. And I just want to touch on something you mentioned before, which is you felt a pull to document the process, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you? Why? I mean, it's an open question, so answer it however you want. But why do you think it's important to document the process? Not just the process of obviously the IMMAFs and whatever, but your entire MMA journey.
Well, because MMA is not just a sport; it's also about getting your name out there and publicizing yourself. So that's something I'm getting better at. I mean, it didn't completely come naturally to me at the start, but I'm sort of working at it and improving. The same way that I work on my ground game or my striking. So that's something I was obviously aware of, but obviously it takes work to do it. So it doesn't just happen by itself. And yeah, so I was lucky, to find someone that was willing to help me with it.
And I think that's another topic on Speaker's Corner. I'll just chuck that at you if you don't mind. And that's the difference between spending time raising your profile and spending time acquiring skills that actually dominate in the octagon, right? Like I'll use somebody from UFC London, and that's Jack Shaw, right? Jack Shaw on a fantastic, unbelievable winning streak. One, he's undefeated. Two, in the UFC itself. The amount of skill that fighter has is evident when he gets in the cage. Timur Valiev is no joke of a fighter, and that third round was unbelievably dominant for Jack. However, he's buried on an undercard on a massive fight card, right? In my opinion, he should have been on the main card. And nobody really knows about him outside of the sort of the hardcore MMA fan base and probably fighters like yourself. How do you feel about the game itself being leaning toward fighters that are more active on social media, may get more opportunities in comparison to understanding that actually what's really important is skills? How do you sort of strike that balance?
I suppose that's just the way it is. I mean, obviously, if you've got it's a promotional thing, like they're trying to make money out of it. So if you've got a better ability to attract people to watch and view your fights, that's just inevitable. You're going to get more favoritism. So there's nothing you can do about that. You just got to accept that as a reality. That the bigger your profile, the more opportunities and the more financial returns you're going to receive from your fight. So, but obviously skills pay the bills as well. Like there's no fighter that's ever gotten to superstardom without having the skills to back it up as well. I mean, McGregor's the best example of someone that's made it to those sort of heights, or made it to the highest heights in MMA, and he's obviously got incredible skills as well. And he would never, even with all his marketing ability, he would have never gotten anywhere in MMA if he didn't have the skills. Because like the UFC is the biggest platform if you want to market yourself, and you're not even going to get there if you don't have a great skill set to back it up. So I think like someone like Paddy Pimblett, I would call him out as someone. I don't think his skills back up his marketability, but he's still a great fighter. Still, to get to where he's gotten, he's got to have some skills as well. But yeah, that's how I look at it.
I mean, I think it's very interesting that you use both of those guys. I mean, I would also chuck Jorge Masvidal into that, right? Like, I'm not saying that Jorge Masvidal isn't a fantastic fighter. I think he is, but I think that his marketability is far larger, specifically in the last few years, than his skills necessarily pertain, right?
Well, that's what's interesting about him is that he was less of that marketability guy, more of the skills pay the bills guy, and now he's become more of the marketability guy. So he's an interesting example because you can see both sides of the coin on the same person. Yeah. So continue.
Yeah, so I think your choice of Paddy Pimblett is an interesting one. I mean, his Cage Warriors run was a really interesting one, and he showed his maturity, I think, in Cage Warriors when he was offered the UFC contract 2 or 3 fights before he left Cage Warriors, and he turned it down. Which to a lot of people that was, oh, he's an idiot. Why is he doing that? How can you turn the UFC down? And he said, look, I just don't think I'm ready. You know, I don't think my skills are quite at a level. I don't think my maturity is quite at a level that I want to be. I want it to be when I go and step in the cage. Now, his 2 performances have shown that there are some holes in his game. Right, Luigi Vendramini gave him everything that he could offer, and Kazula Vargas is, in my opinion, not a UFC caliber fighter, but still managed to hurt Paddy with the first exchange. Now, look, he still went out there and he still dominated when he hit the ground. I think his ground skills are unbelievable. You know, as soon as he hit that hip toss, it was done. You know, like the Vargas had nothing from the ground, and Paddy ate through him just like a hot butter through knife. But a hot butter through knife, Jesus Christ. But you know what I'm saying, right? The skills are obviously there. Like, if we use Paddy Pimblett as an example, how do you view yourself in comparison to that model?
I think there's many similarities between me and Paddy. I guess when I first started martial arts, I had a pretty similar haircut, except it was brown.
Respect. Fantastic haircut. Yeah, fantastic.
No, absolutely terrible, my one was. But there's very few similar. I guess we both have solid ground game, but I suppose what you're asking about is in terms of the marketability versus the skill side of things. I would say in terms of marketability, we're very different. I wouldn't say not to say that I'm unmarketable, but we've got a very different approach to it. Like, I wouldn't say I'm going to go out there flailing my arms around, like doing football chants in my post-fight interviews. But so I suppose we're taking very different approaches. But in terms of, I would say I put myself further towards the actual skills and strategy side of things versus the marketing side, where I think Paddy's more on the other end of the spectrum. Obviously still got enough skills to back it up though.
I'm going to take the last segue, and that last segue will stay in the UFC, and let's talk a little bit about Israel Adesanya. So, in the last conversation, you picked the fight with Izzy almost perfectly. You know, you said that you thought he'd come in, he'd round the holes out in his game, and you thought he'd beat Rob for a second time, and he'd go to a decision, and that's exactly what happened, right? If you could give me your thoughts on who do you think gives Izzy an actual competitive matchup in that division?
I thought the fight with Whittaker was a pretty competitive fight, to be honest. I thought, even though I predicted it right, if anything, it was slightly closer than I would have anticipated.
Okay, interesting. Why do you think that
I
was?
thought Whitaker. I just think Whitaker. He had the Adesanya struggled more when fighters have let him come to them,
Mhm.
and I think Whitaker did that really well. But then the tough part about that is it didn't seem like he did quite enough to warrant the judges giving it to him. Like obviously fighting that style, you're leaving some room to give the judges. You're giving the judges wiggle room to where they can, decide who they give the round to when it's close. So that style is risky. But I thought he did real well. He mixed up the takedowns. He jabbed the taller fighter brilliantly, even though he's at a massive reach disadvantage. He used his jab really, really effectively. Yeah, that's about all I've got to say.
I mean, I think on that, I think you're absolutely right. The style is a difficult one to one deploy, which he did very well, but deploy in a winning fashion is even harder, right?
Yeah.
When you leave the gulf in range with a rangy fighter, it's really tough to close that and not get clipped. But to your point, Whitaker has a very underrated jab, in my opinion. And one thing that you mentioned in the last conversation was that he telegraphed the blitzes a little bit too much, and he was adamant on those blitzes. But in this performance, he was able to utilize that in a much more effective fashion. But if you were to pick the next guy, not necessarily to beat Adesanya, because who knows, this is MMA. But is it Khamzat Chimaev? Is it who is it? Who do you think?
Well, I suppose Cannonier seems like he's going to be the next one, but anything can happen. But I would not give Cannonier a huge percentage of chance for winning that one. I think, you struck it with Khamzat. I think he's the guy that would present the most challenges. Obviously, he's going the welterweight direction first, it seems. But I think, that lifelong wrestling style would be what presents the toughest challenge for Israel. And someone with the type of confidence and belief in himself that he can do it. But obviously, Khamzat's never faced anyone with that body type, and he's so much bigger than those welterweights, and he presents a different challenge with those long limbs and that sort of style. It's difficult to wrestle as I'm preparing for someone with that frame, the tall, skinny guys. Hard to lift them off the ground because they've got just long levers and they can balance and everything. So that'd be a challenge for him in that regard. But yeah, I would look at Khamzat.
Beautiful. Well, look, that's all I've got on my list. Is there anyone that you want to shout out? Anything you want to say? Do you want to just review the fight coming up? You let us know what you got going on.
Yeah, I can just talk a bit about my next fight. So I seen that he was fighting in Bahrain the other week, which is cool to get a view of him so close to the fight. Because his other previous fights have been over in the UK and they were a wee while ago. But I felt like I got a real good glimpse at his style. And yeah, I'm a big fan of what he does. I feel like he uses his body type real well. He's got that long, lanky body type and he uses it well in the striking. He tries to keep his distance. And I noticed that in all his fights that I watched, whether he's coming forward or going back, he uses his range real well. And then really notably against the cage when he fought the Irish fella, in Bahrain, which was a great fight. I don't know if you saw that one. No. So the Irish guy was trying to pin him up against the cage the whole time, and he just really good use of the body type to defend him there. So that was cool to watch, and it'll be interesting. And as we were talking about the skill development, now it comes down to me approaching my training camp in a way that can counter that style. So I'll be interested to see how everything that I've been planning and thinking of works on the night. But and then he obviously he got a great result choking out the Irishman, which is interesting to see. I mean, it doesn't seem like those Irish middleweights can catch a break at the moment. getting
Tell me
choked
about
out
it.
by Kiwis left, right, and centre. Yeah, so that was, and obviously he's got the front headlocks as well. But nah, that should be cool. And then I also really respected his demeanor. He had a real stoic demeanor about himself in between rounds. You know, all that being said, you know, my job's to train hard, and I'm going to go in there fully intending to dominate the fight and come out with a finish.
Beautiful. Well, I'm not going to ask for an official prediction because I don't really like doing that prior to fights. But what I will say is you know, best of skill in the rest of your preparations for the camp and best of skill for the fight itself. If you get a date sorted and nailed on and you know announced, let us know and we'll put something together and we'll do our best to push it over here.
Thanks a lot, man.
All right, mate. Take care of yourself. Thanks very much.
You too. Cheers.